Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bassam Haddad. I'm the director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University. Apologies for the delay. We had a permissions problem with Facebook Live because of an update, and we had to resolve it. So, apologies for the delay to everyone who is joining us. I am accompanied today by three formidable people that I would like to introduce quickly. And we would like to make sure that everyone is here joining us. I'm looking at the codes here to make sure that we are all systems go, and I'm getting a affirmation that we are okay. So this is a very important event for us. It is a project that is going to go on for some years, titled Geographies of the Future: Traveling the Arab Majority World in Virtual Reality. We will be joined by Jessica Holland and Bridget Garachi, and Camille Cole will be co-moderating with me, and she will be leading the moderation. I am very excited to welcome everybody. Welcome, Jessica. Welcome, Bridget, and welcome, Camille. How are you?
Good. Happy
Great.
to be here.
That's awesome. Sorry for keeping you. I know it was like silent and it was a little bit ominous, but we're good now. We triumphed over technology. I am very excited to launch this. This is part of the MIAS podcast, the Spring 2022 series. We've had a few events, and we will have a few more going forward, including the big powwow with your team. But before I give you the floor, I would like to introduce my co-moderator, Camille, who is also a co-partner in crime with us at the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative. She's leading the environment teaching module and doing so many other things, including co-running the environment page on Jadaliya and much more. Hi, Camille.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, very well, very good. I'm going to leave the floor for you to lead the questions after the presentation.
Awesome.
So let's just move on to Jessica and Bridget. I will be adding the bios in the Facebook feed so that people can read at their leisure. So please feel free to lead the presentation, and we are all ears and eyes.
Thank you so much, Bassam, and thank you and Camille both for being here today and for leading this conversation with us. We're really delighted to kick off Geographies of the Future with ASI and Jadliya. And thank you, all of you in the audience. We can't see you, but we feel your presence, and we're really delighted that you're here with us today. And we hope you enjoy our presentation. So, to start things off, let's start at the beginning with how did we come up with this idea for the exhibit anyway? So, in many ways, Geographies of the Future has been unexpected. Jessica and I met in the winter of 2019 when I was a fellow with the American Center of Research in Amman, and Jessica was the center's archivist. So, in May 2019, I was in Beirut and I went to the Sursock Museum and I saw Barash Darushoz's stunning exhibition, Theater of Operations, and it really spoke to me. At the time, I was working on a book, I still am, on the ecologies of war in Iraq, specifically around the southern marshlands. And Barash's work on invasion, occupation, and revolution in the terms of the way that these political processes work and rework the earth was something that I felt I had experienced during ethnographic fieldwork, but I hadn't seen represented in mainstream narratives about the war. So I was blown away by its power, and I returned to Amman and I raved about the show endlessly to Jessica.
And so essentially a few weeks later, after Bridget came back to Amman, we attended a show at a foundation in Amman called the MMAG Foundation, which was called Stars Are Closer and Clouds Are Nutritious Under Golden Trees. And essentially, this show was inspired by Jean Genet's travels through and engagement with Palestine in the 1970s. And some of the artworks in the show really got us talking in a similar way to Barish's work had done for Bridget in Beirut. In particular, Inez Shaba's letter De Jadwa, which centered on a single woman in a photograph from the Arab Ladies Union taken at the King David Hotel. It was basically a fragment of a history of this person with their name, but the rest of their story, the rest of their life story remained sort of unknowable. And that got us interested in this idea of what archives can preserve and what remains unknown. And we were really inspired by this sort of engagement with history and its affective dimensions. So it wasn't until a bit later on when we were still mulling over these two exhibits and we were talking about it, and we thought, Bridget says to me, you know what, why don't we do something with this? Why don't we sort of channel this enthusiasm and this conversation into something more? Let's do an exhibit together. And to be honest, neither of us had much curatorial experience or really any idea of the size of this project or what we're getting into. But the only answer was yes. Of course, I turned to her and said yes. And the end result is this show that you're seeing here today. We're 3 years later and we're well into it and absolutely thriving on the process. So essentially, Bridget's friend Christine Khoury introduced us to Barish, who Bridget mentioned from the Beirut show, as well as Majda Shahabi and Ahmed Barkley, who we'll speak a bit more about later on. I was friends with Ali Yas, who also knew Ahmed Isamuddin. Again, we'll get into more details of the individual works here a bit later. And I'd been really impressed by Arij and Haniti and Eliza Godok's works in Amman that started to look at buried rivers under the center of the city and reflect on what could be possible if that still existed. So again, playing with history, geography, and imagination, which again become key themes of the show. So they all agreed to come aboard and we were on our way.
So then the geographies concept came later. Jessica and I, initially, we thought, okay, let's do something on virtuality, but that felt really dislocated and apolitical. And so we looked a little closer at the artists' abstracts and we realized that they all had this commitment to research, material practice, history, and thinking about them as ecologies and a geography that you could travel across. So we're using the concept geography to reference the meaning of place, the materiality of land, and one's orientation to it. And you can see, you're about to see, because we're going to go through the works, each of the artists was really inspired by this deeper sense of history, a sense of history longer than the past 120 years. And it was really through thinking about transnational connection as a historical process that involved ecologies of human and more than human experience that defines this geography in the sense that artists in the show are using it. The futures that these artists imagine is not disembodied or disengaged fantasy, but a future that can reworks, remixes, and powerfully expands how people can know and engage the Arab majority world. It's a futurity that argues for a self-determined future by surfacing submerged histories, or in some cases, rewriting the past. Artists in the show articulate connections between the futures they imagine on the ground, with on-the-ground social justice movements in Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, and Tunisia that are themselves resonant with transnational social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter, Latinx revolutionaries, and Mediterranean safe passage activism. So let's get into the slides. Let's take a look at the individual works themselves, because I think that's much more interesting than us talking at you. Okay, so the first thing we want you to know is who's in the show. Participating artists include Ala Yunus, Majd al-Shahabi and Ahmed Barkley, Ali Yas and Ahmed Isamuddin, Arij Haniti and Eliza Godoks, and of course, Barish Darushaj. So the first work that I want to introduce to you today is Ala Yunus's work called Battles in a Future Estate. As somebody who works on Iraq, I just can't tell you how much I love this project. Right now it exists online as a lecture that you might be able to see. But Ala is going to developed this for the exhibit as an XR experience. So what that means is basically she's going to bring it into virtual reality, but in an expanded capacity so that it you sort of feel it as you're going through the production. I'll explain that in a second. So before I get there, let's talk about what the project is. And this was the cover image for our event today, but it's also Allah's image for Battles in a Future Estate. It's a microhistory of Haifa Street in Baghdad, and it begins with Saddam Hussein, but the project has 3 temporal moments and really succeeds. I think the success of the project is in the way that it tells the story about political violence, political ambition, and transformation in these very intimate registers of everyday experience. So it begins on the eve of the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam Hussein releases Rifat Chatterjee, a very well-known architect, from prison and recruits Mohammad Makia to come back from exile. And together, they are set to work on building Haifa Street, which is really a reimagining of Baghdad as this sort of modernist beacon that Saddam Hussein envisions it to be. And the street has this sort of it's a covered street with these really beautiful porticos that people are imagined to walk through leisurely, enjoy the days with their family. Faculty are recruited from neighboring universities to take ownership of the apartments above, and it becomes or Saddam Hussein intends it as an example of sort of the promise of Baghdad. Then the second temporal moment is in 2003 with the invading army, U.S. Army, that repurposes those same porticos as a vantage point to fight a rising insurgency in Iraq and to take control of the apartments above. And what Eunice does here that is just so remarkable is she's such a committed researcher. So she's been able to go in depth and find footage video footage that was taken by American soldiers in the invading army of their efforts to claim this apartment complex. And so we see the invasion happening through their night vision goggles. And this is an important detail that I'll come back to in a minute. But we notice the steam rising from a kettle. So we know that that the soldiers are in a home that a family has just abandoned. Or we see soldiers in a bedroom rifling through a lingerie chest, and we immediately understand what a violation that is of somebody's home. This is no longer a war, in theory. It's a war of very intimate dimensions. And then the third stage, or the third temporal moment that Ala Yunus takes up in this project, is post 2014, post Daesh, post ISIS, when real estate developers gain control of the apartment complex and go in to renovate and then list and market these apartments. And of course, people who can afford to buy and establish themselves in these residences are the rising class of multinational contractors in post-Ba'ath Iraq. So we start to see that political transformation in the choice of colors that real estate developers are using for the walls of these apartments that they have taken possession of. So the night vision goggles come back into play in that Ala Yunus is going to develop this piece as an experience that the audience will experience in a VR headset. So the same footage that we see through these night vision goggles, we're also now experiencing through a kind of a goggle ourselves. Okay, moving along to the next piece in this show is Palestine Open Maps. And this is a project by geographers Majd al-Shihabi and Ahmed Barkley. And it's really an ambitious project. They have the technical know-how to, through acts of digital subterfuge, assemble the oldest map of Palestine in record, which dates back to about, or not in record, but one of the largest, oldest maps of Palestine that dates back to 1922. And then they were able to layer that map, that assembled map, with older maps of Palestine from the 1870s and also the contemporary map of Israel-Palestine, so that you're able to navigate between layers of the map digitally. The map can do other things digitally as well, and I'll get back to that in a second, but I want to show you what it looks like printed out. So this, because of the incredible detail of this 1922 map, when you print it, it is quite large and captures incredible detail of Palestine at the time. And so the exhibit will include this large printed map, as well as a computer terminal where you're able to do some research within the map, which I'll come to in a second, and also an AR, which is an augmented reality experience that brings some of that archival material into the physical experience of the map itself. So this is what I was getting at earlier. The digital maps are also incorporated into the digital maps is the Palestine Oral History Archive. And this is a project that Diana Allen has been involved in, and also the American University of Beirut, which houses the archive, obviously has been involved in. So when you look at this digital map, you'll see numbers on the screen, and those numbers represent interviews, oral histories of people who fled the 1948 Nakba. And so they're now much older adults, but these are their memories of their childhood homes, which you can access by clicking on any of those round circles. It immediately connects you to the number of interviews that exist. So 124 would be 124 interviews for that particular location. And then you can access any of those interviews through the AUB website. And so the map is this multidimensional text of geographic locations, but also affective experience, the experience of people who remember the Palestine as it was in 1948. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Jessica, who will present the next pieces in the show.
So I'll speak about another artist collective, Ali Yas and Ahmed Isamuddin. Their work's titled Another Man's Freedom Fighter. And what they do with their work is essentially take us back to the future to ask, what if history can begin with occupation? Not with occupation, but with revolution. And the duo, Yas and Isamuddin, are both based in Berlin currently. Yas with having fled post-2003 invasion in Iraq, and Isamuddin the Sudanese civil war. And when they bring their sort of collaborative artistic practice together, they choose to focus on problematizing the categories that get applied to them. So things like immigrant, refugee, exile, and instead sort of grapple with issues that are not always totally informed by that experience. So looking to expose extractive policies leading to environmental degradation in other parts of the world to sort of broaden out what they can be categorized by. And for this exhibit, they're looking particularly about the role that video games can play in sort of formulating and solidifying the stereotype of the Arab terrorist in gameplay. And using this commission, they'll instead become active creators in these new media technologies, in essentially giving themselves a voice in this world that has so often sought to describe them. Based on a critical reading of Hadi al-Alwi, the Iraqi Sufi intellectual who explored the subversive elements of Arab heritage and reevaluated some critical events such as the Zand Rebellion or the Black Rebellion, Yasmin Samadin will develop this into an augmented reality experience, centering on the history of revolution and its pathways, working towards creating a virtual map of resistance, and complementing this in the exhibition space with works on paper and canvas. And here we see an example, thank you, Bridget, for advancing this slide, of one of the video game environments, which was Ahmed Samadin created as part of an artist residency at Darat Al Fanun in Amman in 2020. And the second artist collective that I'll speak about today is Arish Haniti and Eliza Gordox and their work, The Dido Problem. So the duo are known as Haniti Gordox, and for this exhibition, they'll be presenting a film and sensory experience. I don't know about you, I've currently lost the PowerPoint image, but I'm going to keep going and trust that, yes, fantastic, it's back again. So The Dido Problem centers on the semi-mythical story of Dido, or Alisa, the female explorer who was born in 1839 BCE in Tyre in modern-day Lebanon. And what Dido did was cross the Mediterranean Sea in pursuit of a new life and landed in Tunis eventually. And this sensory and cinematic work plays with the concepts of the natural and the artificial by using digital technology such as programmed AI bots, as you can see from the image here, in tandem with natural objects in the exhibition space, which include things that give off smells or have distinct touches, so salt crystals and river rocks. And in doing so, having this contrast of the natural and the digital together, they explore humanity's relationship with ecology in the age of the Anthropocene. If we advance the slide, please, Bridget. And so this project juxtaposes Dido's journey in pursuit of a better life with the contemporary migration of North African and Syrian refugees and migrants across the Mediterranean Sea in treacherously precarious boats, and with the resulting tragic deaths. And what the duo Haniti and Gordox does, and if we advance the slide one more time, please, is further link this to reviving the myth of Drexciya, the imagined underwater city populated by ghosts of Middle Passage slaves, essentially imagining a world in which all migrants of all historical epochs who've succumbed to watery deaths could perhaps resist by adapting, learning to breathe underwater and absorb salt. And I'll quote from the latest film, version of the film, which is, "Every time you try to drown us, we crystallize." And so in total, this work posits uncharted possibilities for cross-border movement and draws upon parallels of struggles, whilst linking ecological and political realities.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. That brings us to the last work in the show, which is Barish's piece, Locus of Power. And Barish's work engages the circulation, protocols, and function of scenarios and historical narratives in the context of siege culture. For example, Fortress Europe, the US-Mexican border policy, or the Israeli occupation of Palestine, reframing these as tools for critical insights and analysis. Locus of Power stages immersive environments across multiple viewing screens and filmic works that envisage the archaeological site of Europos Dura in Syria, which is in the southwestern part of Syria, right on the banks of the Euphrates River. And he's focusing here on terrestrial matter through two sort of opposed architectural forms, the barricade and the tunnel, that are both conduits of occupation and escape. In the film itself, the film experience, as I saw it at the Sursock Museum, which I'll show you here, you see on two screens images, color-corrected images or colorized images of the archaeological site. And then Barish has created a proto-fictional narrative of this civilization, futurist civilization that is living in the ruins as if they were not ruins, but a presentist state. And one day they're residents of Europos Dura hear subterranean booms, these sonic booms, and they are invaded by an army coming up from below. So the overall work comments on the relationship of archaeological practice to nation state building, particularly around the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and territorial practice in general. And this is a piece, a film that is meant to be shown in companion. So they're shown opposite each other in two darkened rooms. And then this is a third instantiation of the show at SALT in Istanbul, where Barış realized this piece in one large space so that you get the drama of territorial excavation, occupation, and also the revolutionary action in one larger globalized space. Okay, and that's it for the show. But Jessica and I wanted to offer just a few comments in close. So in close, we've seen that each of the artists in the show uses virtual media to articulate a future in ways that are resonant with political action on the ground in the past and in the present, in order to chart a new referential terrain, a new set of references from which they fashion a geography of the Arab majority world, and that geography amplifies the power and the presence of activists, revolutionaries, artists, and intellectuals in the Arab majority world. And then there's the exhibit itself, which Jessica and I, in partnership with our advisory board, Christine Khoury, Regine Sahakian, and Ala Yunus, have really worked to create as a sort of third dimension of the virtual experience, because the exhibit is going to launch simultaneously in 3 locations in fall 2024: Franklin and Marshall College, the University of Pennsylvania, and a gallery in the Levant, which we're in the process of discussions about at the moment. So in this sense, the related programming connected to the show offers a moment or an opportunity of virtual collaboration, community, and partnership in the actual moment of the exhibit itself. Jessica, did you want to offer any comments and close?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose in close, I'd come back to where we started. So thinking about the origins of this exhibit and when it was formulated, because although we had those initial conversations towards the end of 2019, when we really got down to the details of who would be in the show and what it would look like, it was the first lockdown of March 2020. And I think it's not insignificant that moment in time, when the immense power of organizing what we saw with the June of that year and the Black Lives Matter protests sweeping the world, as well as this sort of experiment in collective imagination. Suddenly the entire sort of connected world was online and trying to reproduce social interaction and social experiences in that virtual space. And I think in the absence of physical interactions and the impossibility, or I guess the shared impossibility of travel across borders, was felt in a way that for many of us with sort of passport privileges, we'd never felt before and never truly understood. And I think this really drove home the potential power of the virtual to be a very important tool in imagining futures into being, and sort of collective imaginations and playful imaginations of futures into being, that the realities of present geographies doesn't allow. Essentially forming a portal into somewhere playful, somewhere where imagination can be let to run wild, essentially, without the borders of present realities weighing too heavily on it.
Thank you both so much for that. I have to say I'm really looking forward to this exhibit. I've been looking forward to it ever since you first told me about it. And there's so many things, so many more things that I want to know, and questions that I want to ask you all. So I'll start with a big one, not let you off easy. Which is just, I want to know more about this kind of like big framing concept of geographies that the exhibit is exploring. And I was wondering if you could, talk more about, like, connect more, the big idea to the individual, pieces. I mean, one of the things that I think is that I thought is really powerful about the way you're talking about it is the kind of multi-sensory experience of a lot of this art. And so I was thinking about, the exhibit itself as a geography or an environment, and like how you're thinking about that. I love this idea of like the geography of collaboration or connection. And so I'd really like to hear more about sort of how you're thinking about the concept of geography, both as like a framing for the exhibit and how it's like coming out in the actual experience of the exhibit.
So Bridget, I don't know if you want to jump in there, or shall I start?
Go for it, Jessica. You can start. And Camille, come on. That is a huge question. So just way to like lay down the gauntlet at the outset. That's fine. It's going to take us a little while to answer this question. But Jessica, you have the first stab. Go for it.
Sure. So I mean, I really like what you're bringing up in terms of the geographies of collaboration, the geography of the exhibit itself. And I think that's something quite interesting about virtual works, really, is that often in the exhibit experience, the sort of the one VR piece will exist in a silo and won't be interconnected with other aspects of the program. And I think here, having all of the works engage in some way in different types of VR, AR, XR, essentially experimenting with the virtual in connection with other more traditional works, it tries to get at something closer to a film program where things are considered together and the effect of the works on each other and potential commonalities or different approaches to a similar theme can be explored fully. But I think to get to the geography, we probably have to start with the history, as is sort of inevitable. So I'd say that one of the key things that comes through the show is the direct reference to historical figures. So we talk about Dido and the Sufi intellectual Hadi al-Alawi, but also historical events. So things like infamous ones of the 1948 Nakba or the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, which do percolate through both the geography of the region and as a result, these works.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking about like how the artists in this show, each one of them is really making an argument for a set of reference that can be then used to emplace a new kind of geography, a new point of orientation to travel the Arab majority world. And so there are these known historical events that they reference, but then there are also lesser known histories, such as the Zand Rebellion, which is, I mean, I'm as a scholar who has spent so much time working on the marshes, I'm really interested in this rebellion because it was a revolt of Black slaves, Zanj, against the Abbasid Caliphate from 869 to 883 AD. And Basra landowners had brought several thousand East African slaves to drain the marshes near Basra, and they were forced into heavy labor with meager subsistence. And Zanj forces were like, no, we're not going to do this. And basically organized, grew in size and power, defeated caliphate armies, created a capital inside the marshes, took control of southern Iraq by capturing a strategic seaport on the Gulf, and then forced the retreat of Abbasid forces, took Basra and then Wasit, and established themselves in Khuzestan, Iran, within 10 years. And the Abbasid Caliphate regained control of this territory in what is today southern Iraq only after Egypt sent in reinforcements.
So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to think about the lesser known histories in terms of alternate retellings of history as well. So that's where I think the Palestine Oral History Archive that Bridget referred to earlier, that has videographies that giving the chance for Nakba refugees to remember both childhood homes and villages, which and sort of embedding that within the maps to allow the kind of the modern visitor, the modern user, to be able to see what those places have been replaced with, is significant both from the point of view of individuals and family histories in the Palestinian diaspora, but also in terms of tracking places of community significance. Things like mosques and cinemas are also traced. And something that the Palestine Open Maps team does is have workshops in cities like Amman and across the world, where they invite people in to learn about sort of GIS mapping, and more specifically how they can contribute to making these historic maps more searchable in the sort of digital age, which again contributes directly to that sort of rich geographic record, and in a way allows this alternative version of events to live on and keep growing and keep developing in a way that the sort of Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories tries quite hard to avoid.
Mm-hmm. And then again, in terms of alternate reality or sort of alternative tellings of history, we also see the work of Ala Yunus and the microhistory of Haifa Street that she charts in her work for the show. Other works in the show attend to historical locations that aren't common features of histories as we know them. For example, the site of Europos Dura in Syria, on the banks of the Euphrates, or Jessica, I'm stepping on your toes here, but or Drexia, the mythical underwater city of drowned Middle Passage slaves, which is an important symbol of resistance, and so crucial today, given what is happening on the Mediterranean with Fortress Europe. And so what I think it is we're seeing here, we're getting at, although we haven't neatly articulated this for you because this is still part of, our own thought process, like you're in early in our thought process, is that these geographies are spatial. We can move across them, but they're also temporal. Like, we're not talking about one time period. We're not talking about an even geography that exists in a particular moment in time. It's not frozen in that way. It's dynamic. You can, and the way that artists imagine history is playful. So you can move across these spaces and you can move back and forward in historical time. And that's, I think, part of the dynamic geography that they're getting at.
Thank you both so much. I love this idea of like the way that we have to relearn the past. I don't know if you used that phrase or if I made it up, but like, right, like we have to relearn the past in order to rethink about these geographies, right? I mean, you get a totally different geography from, oh, I'm frozen. I hope you can all still hear me. Okay. Right. Like I feel like you get a totally different way of thinking about the Abbasid Caliphate if you focus on the Zand Rebellion rather than on, the golden age of Islam or whatever. And that just, it creates a totally different way of thinking about the history of Iraq and like the origins, the spaces. I mean, and I think this, I'm gonna butcher it, but Drexia, the drowned city, is also such a. I mean, it's a way also I think of connecting spaces, right? That like we wouldn't normally think of as being connected. I'm sure it's coming from a similar place, but the description that you gave of the exhibit really reminded me of this novella that I read last year, maybe 2 years ago, called The Deep, which is really good. I really recommend it. It's by this person, Rivers Solomon, and it's a utopian kind of envisioning of if all of the unborn children or born children of pregnant enslaved women who were thrown over had a society in this like underwater in this underwater space, and it's set like many years down the line from that. I don't know, and that, you know, that kind of makes me like that kind of connection for me sort of makes me think of the connections between the kind of this kind of work that the artists are doing, that you all are doing, and the work of Afrofuturism. Like, I think it's really so interesting and powerful how deeply all of this stuff is rooted in histories and in historical research, and yet it's about the future. And so I guess that's a very long way of coming to my next question, which is, I'm just really curious about like what was appealing for you and for the artists about the future as something to explore. You know, and I think that it's not obviously unique. Like there's also a short story collection called Iraq Plus 100, which is like I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? It's short stories that are set in Iraq in 100 years. But I do think that there's this kind of shared impulse to think about the past and the present using the future and vice versa. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, do you want to jump in, or do you want me to jump in?
Can I?
You go ahead.
Can I say
Bassam.
No, I'm not going to jump in. I'm just going to share that I am very happy that Camille is joining us as co-moderator because of your intimate connection to the project and your knowledge of this background in general. So I just want to express my gratitude because I wouldn't have been able to probe to the extent that you have. But I also want to comment on something. I was watching earlier, and you had this look on your face, Camille, that was like you were like so happy. So I'm like, I got excited. I just wanted to share that this is an exciting project. I don't know if you were excited about the project or just happy in general, but it's great to be joining. I just want to ask our guests to, at some point, to reiterate a couple of things about the project in general and its timeline, even though it was touched upon, but at any point towards the end or anywhere you feel appropriate to reiterate the expanse of the project and the timeline and perhaps some of the collaborators and so on at your convenience. So I'll duck out now.
Thanks, Bassam.
Thanks, Bassam. That's really important. We'll definitely, maybe we'll end on that note. What do you think, Jessica? Reminding people what?
Yeah, we should definitely remind.
So I had some thoughts, Camille, because okay, yes, absolutely. I mean, yes, Afrofuturism. I think that, you know, I'm thinking about Sun Ra and the, you know, way that he imagined outer space as this kind of metaphorical frontier of freedom when Earth was categorically violent space. And so, you know, we think about the future as kind of a placeholder, like a non-entity, a sort of empty category. And in that way, it sort of it stands in direct contrast to the kind of bounded future that a nation state system imagines, a bordered future. But these futures that artists in the show are imagining are not empty categories or mere geometric extensions of time. They're historically contingent. And here I'm thinking about the work that Rosenberg and Harding did in 2005 on the volume Histories of the Future. It's incredibly gratifying to hear you mention Iraq Plus 100 because I teach and love Hassam Blassim's work, and especially that edited volume, which is so good. But I want to highlight, I think, a key difference here with that volume, because for Blassim, the future is really a critique of the present. It's a critique of that the hubris of George W. Bush, who said, you know, history is going to prove that the Iraq War was just. Even calling it the Iraq War, it was an invasion, right? The U.S. invasion of Iraq was just. And a benefit, and obviously it is not. And Hassam Blassim and the contributors to that particular volume imagine Iraq 100 years out from the 2003 invasion to call attention to the ways in which violence is its own kind of life force. And so it really, I think about it as an ecological text because and the contributors are thinking about um, how do the conditions of war take root, take hold, and then transform and grow as a kind of violent force. But the pieces in Geographies of the Future are imagining a future that's aspirational. Um, and I think they do that really, by doing like what Sun Ra and others have done, which is to think deeply about history and alternative reference to build a different kind of future with. And that I think see as really critical.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing I will definitely check out this book, Histories of the Future. But like one thing that I have thought about in my own work is the way that like, even though we often talk about the past as fixed and the future as open, actually most of the time when we talk about the future, we have something in mind and it's fixed. And you're totally right to associate that with like the bounded, bordered, nature of the nation state. And so I think it's really hard actually to leave the future open, which is like one thing that's really particularly cool about the exhibit. I guess a kind of part of that, and maybe like part of how they're playing with the artists are playing with the future and the past and the experience is the technology that's going into it, right? So I feel like just the kind of how they're realizing their ideas is just as important as the concepts that are going into it. And I have to admit that before talking to you all and hearing about this, I've always thought about virtual reality as just like kind of dumb, like a thing that you use if like your Wii is not enough for you and you like have to do tennis swings in your living room or whatever. But obviously the artists are doing way more than that. Like they're doing things that go so much beyond that. So I was just wondering, yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about how they're using technology in different ways in the exhibit, in the individual works, and like why that's meaningful.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to jump in on this one, Bridget. Please do chime in at any point if you'd like to add. So I think what's interesting about the works in the exhibit is that the artists in the show have differing opinions on this. So some of them, not quite exactly perhaps the way you phrased it there, but certainly are critical of the sort of disembodiment that comes with putting on a VR headset in particular, and actually see the thinking more about physical embodiment and our relationships back with the real and the sort of sensory as being a form of resilience. So I'm thinking particularly here of the Haniti Godox piece, where they've actually chosen to move away from the VR technologies they were developing in sort of 2019 and early 2020 and move towards kind of environments that combine films with a semicircle of screens to sort of create an enclosed space where the visitor to the exhibit is then able to have be immersed in the experience through things like the smell of sea salt or the smell of river water through the rocks that are positioned around these screens. So there's that end of it and that kind of critique, but then on the other side, there is something in what comes up, particularly in the exhibit, is that the VR and AR technologies actually allow people to temporarily, albeit, supersede geopolitical realities of occupation and actually project a form of themselves into and literally onto land that is currently out of reach for many people. So I'm thinking particularly here of the Palestine Open Maps project and that mapping space and the idea with the use of virtual technologies, the visitors to the exhibit will be able to explore elements of the map which are not just in the 2D sort of space, but also in that sort of physically immersive technology. So yes, it is definitely complex, and we didn't want to make a straight up exhibit that was sort of bang out of Silicon Valley and wow, isn't virtual incredible? It's going to transform everything. No, there's certainly problems, and it's good to be critical. After all, a lot of the artists in the show are very much research-led practice artists, so of course they weren't going to be accepting this format without any questions. And queries. But yes, I think there's also that playful sense of being aware of the challenges and limitations, but also excited about the possibilities that it might lead to.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, like, one of the coolest exhibits I've ever been to was an exhibit that had smell as part of it, or like was an exhibit of scents, which seems like it would actually be really hard to do, but is like a very, I mean, right? Smells are so evocative that it just creates a totally different experience of like a place, whether that's a real place or like a museum place. Yeah, I guess you've said a couple things, over the course of the different answers that I want to just pick up on. And so, I mean, so Bassam mentioned in the beginning when he introduced me that I am kind of here in my capacity as like part of the Jaliliya Environment page, and I work on the environment module for the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Project. So obviously, for me, I am interested in ecologies, and Bridget and I have connected about this many times in the past. And so I was just wondering, like if anybody came here from the environment page or via that and is still on the call, props to you. But also, I think in some ways it might not be obvious how this is environmental, or, I definitely think it is, but I would love to hear you, like, what you think about why the environment or ecology makes sense as a lens. I think one thing that obviously occurs to me is the relationships between geography and landscape. And I think it sounds like the artists are kind of exploring this in different ways, but also like the virtual and the non-virtual. But I'm just curious to kind of hear how you're thinking about it. I think one of the things one of you said. Okay, awesome. Yay.
There's a fun sound effect from Bassam there. He really supported that point.
Sorry, guys.
About the mention of the environment page.
I just wanted, it's really bad, but I wanted to include a response to what Camille was saying, and it just took a while to happen, so it kind of got botched. I'm sorry. So the applause was at the wrong time. I apologize.
No worries. We can pull out all the time. Anyways, I forget what I was going to say. Oh, something about, I loved what one of you said about virtual, that's the virtual being materially grounded. Anyways, go for it.
Yeah, like just drop in a small question here and there. It's fine. Okay, so I can dive into this one. So I think, like, first of all, the works in the show are really pushing our concepts of what the environment is, how we know it, how can we engage it and understand it. And for me, work on ecology, like thinking about ecology, is a very useful term, because we have to accept first and foremost at the outset that there is no division between nature and culture. And when we do that, we can then see and understand that processes that are extractive at their core, like colonialism, occupation, war, political violence, slavery, global capitalism, are biopolitical processes that have effects that work in and through the land. And I think the artists in the show are really calling attention to a kind of transformative way of thinking about ecologies that, as scholars of environment, are right in line with the conversations that all of us are having at the moment. And also give us something to think about, like, what is as you mentioned, Camille, and I don't have a great answer for this, but maybe Jessica does. What is the potential of thinking about environment in this kind of materially grounded virtual space? Jessica, you want to dive in?
Sure. So the prospects of thinking about the environment in this materially grounded virtual space. Well, I mean, I'd say that obviously we're seeing particularly with the youth of the global youth, and being particularly conscious of the impacts of environmental change on their future, It's something that's sort of been building for a while, and so I think it's impossible to be thinking about virtual spaces and new technologies and without actually taking into consideration the impact is the one thing that's sort of a unifying global challenge that almost even amongst perhaps the most conservative climate skeptics and sort of pockets of the world, they're certainly being sort of drowned out, and the realities of the situation are becoming much more present. So I think it's impossible to sort of move forward without having the environment as a central aspect and that central concern. But also, perhaps, I did say earlier about the 2020 moment making us very excited about the possibility of the virtual, but I think I can say with confidence of not having any sort of pushback on this, that I think the last few years have also taught us the limitations of the virtual, and actually a much stronger appreciation for those moments of physical interaction, of things like touch, of the feel of the sand between your toes, your fingers in running through a stream, or that kind of embodied experience, essentially. So when we talk about the exhibit here, I think trying to have sort of bridges between the possibilities that are afforded to us through the virtual, but without losing a sense of the fact that it is the physical and the materially grounded aspects of life and what it is to sort of be human in this sort of Anthropocene age, that we always come back to, and that it is the most powerful thing to reflect on.
Yeah, I think also just like chiming in here, and then maybe Jessica, you want to maybe we should go back to the question that Bassam asked us a few minutes ago about logistics. I'll turn that over to you. But so far we've been talking about this in terms of like the capacity of political intervention to ruin wholesale ecologies and the attention that artists call to that. But they're also, I think, really working hard at the same time, especially in the commitment that they have to history, to thinking about the revolutionary potential of earthwork and like of actually the expertise that comes with knowing an environment. And I'm thinking here, about the marshes, for example, which today are so polluted in Iraq, and yet people living in the marshes are making families, people are getting married, they're preparing for generations to continue living in the marshes. And that in and of itself, like being able to stay on the land, is a way of holding and claiming territory. And we see that in the pieces in the show, I think very strongly in Palestine Open Maps, where Palestine as it existed in 1922 is captured on the map, but doesn't exist today in person. But the geographies that the Palestine Open Maps project is able to articulate are, tangible geographies. You might not be able to smell the interviews, but they are a sensory experience. You're able to listen to these stories about people talking about like what their home looked like, what who they played with, where the main square of their village was, and how they engaged it and enjoyed it. And so I think the potential of the show is that artists are really harnessing the virtual to creative potential, to think about and instantiate ecologies that don't exist on the ground today, but that can exist in a virtual space. So I'll turn it over to you, Jessica, to talk about our aspirations for the future and where this project is going.
And
yeah. So,
may
sorry.
Sorry, I keep coming from like somewhere, and I interject and so on. Can you also share with us before we close at some point, maybe along the same lines of what you're going to say now, something about the next event specifically and the date, so people who are listening now who are interested can actually pencil it in.
Yes. Okay. So maybe I'll start with that to make sure we've got it in. So our next event will be on April 14th, and most excitingly, Bridget and I will be there briefly, but the majority of the show will be a chance for the artists to speak for themselves about their projects. They'll be speaking for roughly 5 minutes each with an image or a new video clip or a kind of a short visual prompt. And essentially we'll be able to have a lively discussion afterwards with the opportunity to speak to these 8 stellar artists and artistic teams. So please do come along for that. It will be again hosted by ASI and on the Facebook live channel in much the same way it is now, and I think probably a similar time of day as well. I think we have 12 p.m. Eastern time penciled in. Is that correct? I'm looking at Bassam and Bridget. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's
Fantastic.
cause for celebration. So
let's get the weekend started.
I actually don't do much of that, but I am very excited that we are going to have this a broader event, and look forward to it. And we would love to keep in touch so that when the exhibit is, because we're collaborating with George Mason and ASI. When the exhibit is ready, we would love to host you at George Mason. This is something that we're all looking forward to. And the more I talk about this project with colleagues and collaborators, the more excited I get, because they get excited. So thank you all very much. And sorry, I did not. I did not interject or intervene because Camille was doing such a great job, and I wanted to not lower the bar of the conversation. I did with the applause and the gimmicky stuff.
Okay.
It would be fantastic to come to George Mason. That would be brilliant. And yeah, I think we're looking forward to that. That's one of the maybe the aspirations for the show for the future. Aside from reiterating the key stats as you encouraged us to do, which is great. So there'll be 2 installations of the show running simultaneously in fall of 2024 at Franklin and Marshall College and at University of Pennsylvania, both in Philadelphia, as well as a third location in the region, in the Levant, that we're finalizing in the coming months. And so we're really excited to have the opportunity to have the show reach so many people within the Philadelphia community. And aside from the physical, speaking a lot about the physical and the virtual, our long-term plans for the show is to have a website enabling international participation and viewership of these works, which would be informed through working with the artists themselves and through dialogue there. So we hope that this is just the first step in a longer term project. I don't know if I want to throw it over to you, Bridget, there, if you want to add anything. Or
no, I think I would just say that I'm really encouraged by the level of enthusiasm that we've heard so far for this project, which is wonderful, because this really was not something that we had anticipated doing. And also just the commitment of the artists to this project is remarkable, and I think speaks to their interest in working collaboratively together, which we're hoping could also be like one way that we use virtual media to really foster a sense of collaboration and partnership on the exhibit, but also in artistic production in general. So thank you guys for having us.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
I am actually. Why am I getting a call now? I am actually very happy that we did this, and it does merit, because we were wondering how to proceed because it's a huge project. I feel that we are affirmed now by having this introduction, so that when we do the bigger thing, we can also reference this interview, this discussion, and people can take a look before they get there. And I'm getting texts, by the way, from a few friends saying this is really wonderful, which we don't usually always get when we when we do a lecture on the political economy of Turkey, for instance. I don't have people texting and saying, "Wow, this is amazing." Although it's an
Okay.
important topic. I mean, so this is really exciting. And guess what? Yeah, last week when we hosted, or few weeks ago, when we hosted Katil Hayek, she was talking about Arab fandom and basically Game of Thrones in the Middle East, and how it actually, the political implications of you know the show in the region. We also got a lot of interest. So for some reason, the less we talk about politics proper, although this is all politics, but the more we talk about politics, the less we talk about politics proper, the more interested people are. So I'm glad we're doing this. Thank you both so much for being here. I included all of your bios in the feed. Thanks to Bridget Garachi. Am I pronouncing it properly?
Great.
And Jessica Holland, um, for joining us from all the way from London. And Bridget, you are in the land of the free, right?
I'm in Philadelphia.
You're in Philadelphia. I'm in Philadelphia.
I know. We just learned that today.
Why aren't we in the same place? We could have
Right. We
saved.
should be in the same place with some.
We would have saved like $2 because every time we add a picture. Oh my God. And thanks, Camille, for joining us and elevating the conversation. I am looking forward to more collaboration with everyone here and the good folks who will be joining us. Is there anything that you would like to share as your closing remarks, or are you satisfied? Anybody?
I don't know. I'll give the last word to Jessica, but I'll just say thank you so much for your support and for ASI's support. And Camille, thank you so much for being here. And your questions gave us a lot to consider, which I know is going to only make the show better. And we're really looking forward to April 14th when the artists will be here. I know that's going to be a great conversation. They're so dynamic, and we feel really lucky to have this caliber of artistry in the show.
Wonderful. And let me just say that, oh, sorry, Jessica or Camille?
Oh, well, I was just going to say my last word was that I was so happy. I never thought when I started working on the Knowledge Production Project with Bassam and Renetta last April, actually, that it would coming to this. But I'm really happy and grateful to be part of the ASI network and the Jedelia's sort of environs. So just happy, and thank you so much for being here.
I'm gonna do an applause. Don't be scared, because the last time I did it, Jessica flinched because it was loud. Look, it's here. I'm a boy in the end, right? So we have to push buttons. Camille, any last words?
No, I'm good. Just, thank you to all of you. I mean, thank you for bringing me in, and giving me the chance to grill you and to see how cool this project is going to be. I'm really
Wonderful.
excited for it.
Thank you all. And again, my name is Bassam. I'm directing the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason, the MIAS program, and we're hosting and collaborating with this project. And we will be having a few other events besides the April 14th event on Geographies of the Future. We're hosting Basilios Zeno, who will be talking about sectarianism, in quotation mark, in Syria. We're also hosting potentially a talk by Sinan Antoun, who is somewhat connected to this project, speaking about his work in literature and his recent novels. As you can see, we're also trying to mix it up a lot between politics proper and otherwise. And we might also host another talk by Osama Isber on translation and Arabic literature. So this is going to be a busy spring, and we hope that you will join us. Thanks to everyone who joined. Thanks to our collaborators and co-sponsors at George Mason University, including GLOA, Global Affairs, Shar School of Policy and Government, as well as the Center for Global Islamic Studies, And thank you all for joining us. We will now release you so you can go back and enjoy your wonderful lives and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.